Hi, I'm Nancy Eha, the Queen Mother of the Royal Order of Bead Explorers. Welcome to my beading studio. Bead Creative Like Crazy is one of the fabric beading books that I have published. In Bead Creative Like Crazy, I've taken thread embroidery patterns and turned them into beading patterns. Today, we're going to take a look at how to make the chain stitch. As you can tell, instead of using thread, by using beads, you have more of a three-dimensional look to all your chain stitching. Right here is a couple of samples of two different variations of making the chain stitch with beads. Each chapter of my book, Bead Creative Like Crazy, focuses on a different embroidery stitch. This is some examples from the chain stitch chapter, where you can tell I have many different patterns for you to use to accomplish different configurations using the chain stitch. You can take the patterns that are in the back of the book to a photocopy machine and make the patterns on paper. I use paper for foundation piecing, which is readily available for quilters. There are two types of paper for foundation piecing. One type is the newsprint kind. It has the ability to tear off easily. A second type of paper for foundation piecing is a vellum paper. As you can tell, the vellum is slightly translucent so that you can see your fabric underneath your pattern. I have taken a portion of the paper pattern, cut it off of the pattern, and pinned it to my fabric. Now I'm ready to start beading. For the chain stitch, I'm going to start at the top of the pattern and work downward. I only use a paper pattern when I'm doing a beading technique where I want control over where the beads are going to lie. There's a lot of freeform beading that I do that I don't use a paper pattern for. But this will help give us a more repetitive and regular shape to our chain stitch. What I've done so far is put in a row of size 11 seed beads on my needle and thread and have them fall down to the fabric. To make the first chain in the chain stitch, I want to make a loop of beads that, when I bend them into a loop formation, I'll be able to just barely see the next black dot in my pattern. I think I'll need one more bead, so I'll put that on my needle and thread, let it fall down to the other group of beads. And now what I'm going to do is going to push all the beads away, out of my way, except for the first bead, which I'll pass the needle through the first bead on that row into my paper pattern and pull tight so that a loop forms. There's the first loop of our chain. The next loop is started by putting the needle and thread through the pattern on the black dot and the fabric, and the needle and thread are coming out inside of the first loop or the first chain. Once again, I'll put a group of size 11 seed beads on my needle and thread, and I'll let them fall down to the fabric, and once again I'll know that I have the right number of beads on my needle and thread if, when I make my next loop, once again I can see the black marking or the black dot for the next loop in the chain. So I've got a start here, but I can tell not quite enough beads, so I'll need to add some more. Push them down, flush to the fabric, and looks like just a couple of more beads will do it. Okay, so once again I push all the beads down the needle. I move all the beads out of my way except the first bead that was in this second chain. I put my needle and thread through the bead and the pattern and the fabric and give the thread a nice tug for tight tension, and you can see now that this next chain has just barely gone around the next black dot for the next chain in the marking. So my needle and thread comes through the fabric to the right side on the black dot. I'm going to position it with inside the chain, the last chain we made, and I'm ready to add more beads. Now you would repeat making chains for your chain stitch or loops for your chain stitch until you have the desired length. To add the chain stitch, I'm going to put on just a few beads on my needle and thread, just enough so when I hold down the last loop I made, that a few beads will cross over the loop and hold my chain stitch in place. So that's what I'm doing now. I have about 4 beads on my needle and thread, and I'm going to pull tight, and we've ended the chain stitch by putting a very short row of beads to anchor down the last loop or the last link in the chain. Now that you know how to make the basic beaded chain stitch, I thought it'd be fun for you to see the patterns next to the completed bead configuration. So here's pattern number 2, and you can see with the green there's a zigzag. It looks a little softer than the pattern. Here's pattern number 4 next to pattern number 4, and here is pattern number 5. On pattern number 5 we have a join chain going down with the gold beads, and then the individual links of the chain on the outside of the gold, making a more ornate pattern. After the beading stitches are complete for the chain stitch, then the paper patterns are removed. And the reason I use paper for foundation piecing is that it tears away from the fabric, and if you're careful you can tear it away without pulling your knots through or changing any of the looks of the stitches.